Okay, Mike Carberry, your line should be open.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you for allowing me to speak this afternoon. I'm with the Sierra Club's Nuclear Free campaign, and I'm from Iowa City, Iowa. Our last three speakers who were from the nuclear industry are telling us that nuclear power is clean, safe, and cheap, and they forgot to say that it was too cheap to meter. We all know that in reality, nuclear power is dirty, dangerous, and expensive. And they are also claiming that nuclear power was a climate change solution, when in fact it's the most dangerous and expensive way we've ever thought of to boil water. They conveniently ignore the front-end energy use of nuclear power and the fuel cycle, and the energy needed to babysit the nuclear waste for 200,000 years. So what we really need is a carbon-free and nuclear-free future, or we won't have one. Now let's get back to why we're really here. This is the Nuclear Waste EIS, and I have a prepared statement here. Until permanent isolation of existing radioactive waste from the biosphere has been demonstrated, there should be no confidence in licensing waste production. And the NRC should stop licensing new reactors and relicensing old ones. The NRC does not have the authority to license making more waste until it is proven that the waste can be isolated from the environment. We have no current working process to isolate or remove radioactive waste at all levels of our environment. The NRC is too closely involved with the nuclear industry to make an objective decision regarding waste generation. There should be no more licensing or relicensing of nuclear reactors until the permanent disposal of radioactive waste becomes a proven reality. Why should we condone continued licensing of new reactors and relicensing and renewing licenses from old reactors while we are facing the dilemma of not being able to safely dispose of 700,000 or 70,000 metric tons of commercial high-level waste already generated, and the 2,000 metric tons being produced each year by the nuclear power reactors in the United States? The EAS should consider and analyze the option of not generating any additional waste. It should consider and evaluate phasing out nuclear reactors in the near future. Creating additional waste when there is no identifiable solution for its permanent disposition cannot be justified. There are other methods of generating electricity that do not generate radioactive waste. Prevention and precaution. The EAS must consider and analyze the variety of potential methods for storing the more than 80,000 tons of highly radioactive irradiated spent fuel that is currently housed at our reactors. The risk of a pool storage and cast storage needs to be carefully considered. Overcrowded and irradiated and spent fuel pools is an unacceptable risk to the public. The NRC should take immediate action to reduce the number of fuel assemblies in the water-filled pools, as well as analyzing the deficiencies of the current dry gas storage. New potentially less dangerous methods such as hardened on-gas site storage, also known as HOS, should be fully evaluated in the EIS. The storage and transport of high burn-up fuel must be fully evaluated also in the EIS. The EIS needs to consider the entire fuel cycle in its scope, including the effects of mining, milling, processing, transport, reactor operation, decommissioning, and final storage. The true cost of nuclear power should be assessed in detail in the EIS, including the substantial front-end subsidies and the long-term costs of decommissioning and management of nuclear waste. Without the fuel cycle being included within the scope, the EIS will be derelict in its purpose and to the environment. The environmental, social, and economic costs associated with the fuel cycle need to be part of the report. Nuclear reactor owners and operators are not fully financially responsible for the disposal of their waste. Once the waste leaves the reactor site, the U.S. taxpayer is on the line for any accidents and liability. These long-term hidden costs must be made apparent and in full view and via full cost accounting. The EIS needs to take into consideration environmental justice questions, such as who bears the burden and who reaps the benefits. Native peoples and peoples of color and those in poor communities have historically been disproportionately impacted by all the links in the nuclear chain, from mining to radioactive waste dumping. Intergenerational equity should also be considered. The electricity has been used or wasted in this generation, but dozens of more generations to come must work to isolate it and protect themselves from it. The EIS must address reactor need for water and consequences related to the use of that water. Nuclear reactors use large amounts of water to cool the reactor and to keep the fuel pool stable. In California, the consequences of the enormous amount of water needed in the reactors for once-through cooling were recognized. This led to concerns about dwindling water resources that resulted in statewide mandates to reduce the amount of seawater being used by all the energy plants. Water is a scarce commodity in many parts of the United States. Global warming continues to decrease the river and lake levels needed to cool reactors. Having to shut down reactors while at peak energy needs of all the hottest days of the summer adds to the unreliability and safety issues of storing nuclear waste in fuel pools. Water is needed in case of accidents to prevent nuclear power cores and waste pools from overheating and melting, releasing enormous amounts of radioactivity in the air. We learned that from Fukushima, that the water has gotten contaminated and it is still being released into the Pacific Ocean over 2 years after the initiation of the triple meltdowns.
And Mike, can I ask you to wrap up? And
Sure.
It sounds like
Yes.
From your prepared statement, it would be a great written comment to send into the NRC also.
Okay, just a couple more things here, and then I'll wrap it up. The dangerous and unpredictable effects of global warming in all aspects of the nuclear industry must also be taken into account. I've already talked about nuclear power is not a climate change solution. All nuclear reactors and reactor sites are not created equal. A generic environmental impact statement for evaluating waste and waste storage at all reactors is an irresponsible and unscientific response to the challenges posed by long-term irradiated waste storage. Each reactor site has its own unique environment. State issues can range from those from being close to large population centers, being a floodplain, and having seismic issues. A generic EIS cannot paint a true picture of the impacts of waste generation and storage on a highly radioactive spent fuel. Because the NRC generically rules it has confidence that there would be a solution for high-level nuclear waste, the dangers were never allowed to be considered at each site. And in summary, we have no real confidence in waste confidence. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
States in the nation, Illinois, and I can tell you that most people aren't aware of it. They have become more recently. Actually, because Braidwood, the 10 years of dumping radioactive wastewater laced with tritium on that community, took the front page of our Chicago Tribune, and people started waking up. Or more recently, what's going on in Byron. Every time something's on the news, to allay fear, it's not injurious, it's not harmful. But I can tell you that I personally know of the families of multiple cancers in the Braidwood area. So I think that their stories need to be told. Fukushima, how can you begin to put out something generic and not take into effect what is happening, account what is happening as we speak? Fukushima, sadly, is being kept out of our media. You get a little bit on it here and there, or you really have to look for it on the internet. But it's a real problem. It's happening now, and I would wage the electronic minds of Japan, where most of electronics even come from. If they can't figure out how to stop it, then certainly how can we? We don't handle disasters well. Witness Katrina. We did not handle Sandy well. It is always the individual homeowner and taxpayer. And in the case of nuclear, your homeowner's insurance will not cover you on nuclear disaster. So in terms of what you are doing, in terms of what you are doing on behalf of the public and what is safe for them, what is good for them, you must take these things into account. Generic isn't good enough. You need to be spending the bulk of your time on the unimaginable. And as smart as we are, because I heard earlier on the pat on the back for we're smarter now than we were 50 or 60 years ago. We're not as smart as we will be 100 years from now if we still exist. Actually, I think I'd prefer to be done in by global warming, because a nuclear disaster will be so catastrophic, and I don't think any of the folks from the nuclear power industry are going to be out there helping us dig out of the rubble for those who survive it. It is just inconceivable that you don't plan on the riskiest. I don't care if it's as long as there's any risk whatsoever, consider that that might be what happens, and the fact that you won't be able to control it. So I applaud the courts. I applaud them for having the industry, and if they're truly a responsible industry, and if the NRC is truly responsible to the American electorate that it serves, then it behooves you to take this time. I read the potential of 7 years to study this. I don't care how long it takes. It can take 10 years, it can take 20. That's a drop in the bucket to the life of these radioisotopes. It deserves it. Do not rush this through. Do not do it generically. Consider places like Illinois where we are relying on you. And I thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you very much, Maureen. And I forgot to mention this earlier, is that we're only taking one comment per person at the meeting, so I apologize to those of you who thought you could speak again, but we're going to go to someone who hasn't spoken, and this is David Lee, and David will tell us about